We have many more surprises in store for you.
A surprise here and there that you maybe didn't expect.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going over the real reason that every Helldivers 2 update feels so bad and what turned this massive relaunch into a complete disaster. And before anyone pins the "you're mad about the fire shotgun nerf," it's never been about any of the nerfs. It's about why the nerfs existed in the first place. And it's about the majority losing faith in Arrowhead's ability to make positive decisions for the future of Helldivers 2, while consistently gaslighting us since launch. They just released this new statement talking about every one of the top searches for their game, and the best part about this entire post is that this is what I would count as the bare minimum of what's expected of any game. The problem is that this is the company's new direction and not what they currently believe in. So it'll take 60 days for them to figure out why 70% of the player base thinks the massive relaunch was mid to bad. The CEO also says he wants steps in the right directions, but why do these games always come down to steps? Why aren't we on a bullet train in the right direction? And what's the destination for this game? We were sold a game where we would have overpowered weapons fighting overwhelming odds, but we consistently get bad weapons with underwhelming odds. And if you think the game's hard, it's balanced around tier 5. So, like, the game is literally balanced around the middle difficulty, which is a complete joke. The hardest difficulty has always been a complete joke, not even by a skill issue standard, but just by, like, having general knowledge about how the game works.
Domain expansion minefield.
Oh, don't breathe! No!
Holy sh-
See what the strategies are and how they're going to figure out how to get a foothold in this new difficulty.
The triangle. We know what hole that goes
The
into,
triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right. The square hole.
Every one step forward is 2 massive leaps backwards. In this post, we even got the actions speak louder than words angle, but in the same paragraph, it says that they have long dev times, so it's impossible for them to take any action. So as realistic as Arrowhead likes to balance Helldivers 2, they're very unrealistic when it comes to even running their own company. And before we go any further, balance is not content, and I am extremely tired of just pretending that it is. So that's why we're going to light this off by removing the ability to cope about pretty much any balance decision that's ever made in this game ever again, and show why every single nerf that was ever done in Helldivers 2 could be completely reverted and nothing would change outside of people having more fun. So our first big elephant in the room is the fun police.
I've canceled the fun police. Dap me up.
The balance team isn't just disconnected from Helldivers 2, but any video game altogether. And if you're new to the situation or don't play Helldivers 2, as a reference point, every single weapon in the game loses 1 damage if you're standing still or moving backwards. But if you're moving forwards, you gain that 1 damage and hit a bunch of breakpoints that the weapons are balanced around. This has been a problem for a few months now, so that should be a good enough reference point to start with how well the balance team is really doing. But to really grasp the entire picture, we have to travel back in time a little bit so you can make your own decision on if you think how they do things is good or bad. Long ago, the old railgun caught a nerf for all the wrong reasons, and the old railgun had a bug with PS5 that caused it to do exponentially increased damage when cross-platforming. Even the CEO said it should be nerfed because it was so OP, but solo it was just fine. And how do you nerf something that you don't know what the baseline is because of a bug? At this time, every other support weapon in the game was like literally garbage. So this was the only option and was the first example of nerfing from the top down to create a toxic meta. And when so many people reported it, made videos and posts about it, hundreds of thousands of eyes, millions of eyes on these bugs, but somehow nobody at Arrowhead Studios caught any of that. How did nobody see that? Its popularity was also only there because the rockets sucked at launch. They only added the ability for them to not ricochet, not bounce, like basically the patch that they nerfed the railgun. And how is it that like all the things that are supposed to remove armor aren't working correctly? And then you think that, oh, the railgun's too popular. There's a reason that it was so popular. It's because everything else sucked. And it's not just bugged things that got nerfed, it's also just popular things. The breaker was nerfed in this time frame because it was the only weapon that felt good to use outside of the Scorcher. Everything else pre-buff literally felt terrible to bring in. Even the old Slugger, I know people loved it, but it was never that good. It was like B tier at best versus both factions. It was never this insane mega weapon. The ability to CC one thing on helldive really never mattered. For tier 5, it was, sure, maybe it was amazing, but the nerfs that it caught removed its identity. Not only did it just become a worse Punisher, it also had the ability to break fences and doors removed. there's no way anybody could justify to me that any of the shotguns shouldn't be able to just shoot a fence down. It doesn't make any sense. My brain isn't wired in a way that I could understand how this conversation even came up to remove that. And in my opinion, this was the first time the balance team showed how much they hate the player base just for doing something fun. Shortly after this, they also buffed all sources of fire damage because nobody was using it. So fire damage got buffed by 75% in total, right? Now, I don't know if any of you rocket surgeons out there know what a multiplier of 0 is. That's crazy. To be fair, the flamethrower did suck until it got mega buffed, but all the damage over time effects worked if you were the host, which was basically mass reported, and everywhere you looked, you couldn't go for more than a few scrolls without seeing a video or post about it. But I think my favorite talking point is always going to be the eruptor, because it truly showed the balance team's peak performance. The art team, the sound team, generally the people who brought this game to life and made us all fall in love with it, are having their hard work annihilated. So the patch the eruptor got nerfed, all explosions were sucking things in, which lets you shoot twice and pretty much wipe any group of anything with any explosive weapon because it was nicely stacked up. The crossbow also got completely gutted from its launch date. It used to be good at horde clear, now it's just terrible. And how is it that a bug that drastically increases the eruptor and crossbow's power and viability is in the game, but both weapons get nerfed? It just doesn't make sense. And shrapnel only became a problem because of a ricochet change that had 0 impact on the game. So my question is, how wasn't the answer to roll back the change that only broke one mechanic and has little to no impact on the entire game? Another massive issue is the insane amount of hidden changes that cause most of the bugs and problems. So many things are constantly happening behind the scenes that I know they've lost track of what's going in and out of the game. That one damage thing being bugged for months is a prime example of that. But that also catches us up to the most recent update where they had to release another explanation that just enraged more people by telling us their plan to remove more features from the game in the future. If you have to explain your patch, it's not a good patch. You don't need to cover for yourself, you just need to have good updates. And the actual patch notes were so disingenuous that they tried to hide the fire nerf in miscellaneous fixes. Like, I guess that was so it would get glossed over. That's what happened to me when I went over the patch notes. I just glossed right over that, and of course, that's right as we were getting the new Fire War bond. So again, we were promoted something that just got pre-nerfed like Polar Patriots. They even show the Fire Gout coming out in the trailer looking completely different as the update hit. So both the new primary and secondary flamethrowers would be realistic and balanced. And I can only thank the top Ds on Arrowhead's balance team for teaching me that flamethrowers can't shoot through chain link fences. I don't believe this was an accident at this point either. I'm 100% all in on the fact that the fun police are trying to kill the game, because they even removed enemies shooting through walls as a known issue with their most recent hotfix, even though it is still a problem that was never resolved. But talking about the flamethrowers being more realistic, even with the idea of creating area denial, you still end up in a position where on the hardest difficulty, Super Helldive, you just trade damage. And it would have made a lot more sense to me if I was wearing the fire armor and wanted to trade damage instead of being forced to. Also, to clarify, because I know this is a hot topic for quite a few people, I don't think the flamethrower ever should have been able to insta-kill charger legs. They were flopping over in like 1 second, which was silly, but a couple of seconds, in my opinion, still makes sense. They also added this troll booster that basically just spam team kill spawns, so all it does is bleed out your reinforcements, and it makes the only redeeming quality of the Warbond the new fire pump action shotgun. And it ends up being one of the best guns in the game because it keeps you safe with high stagger, and the damage over time helps compensate for bad shots and just lets you finish enemies off. But it's not overpowered. It just feels good to use, and it's the baseline of what every primary weapon should feel like. The impact it should have on your kit, how it makes you play. It should be one of the pillars of what makes your loadout strong. And my main takeaway from this entire War Bond and Polar Patriots is that they were generally just misleading from the trailer to the live server, and the current direction of the game isn't what we were sold either. So the first link in the description is the Swedish consumer agency. And in the past, they did fine Fat Shark for what they did after we complained. So even though I think that what Arrowhead did is a lot less egregious, it's still the best way to have your voice forcefully heard if you don't feel like it's being heard. And maybe this will be the thing that actually gets them on track with what realistic feels like. The devs have always nerfed based on popularity, but fundamentally don't understand that if something is bugged, you fix the bug, and then you balance the weapon after you see what happens when the bug is fixed, not triple nerfing on top of a bug because you have no baseline to balance from at that point. And at that stage, you're just taking shots in the dark and guessing at what needs to be done. But even at the stage of just spreadsheet balance, I genuinely thought they turned it around with the last update where they buffed orbital precision strike and Gatling barrage. That was a good update. Everybody was happy about that. But this update, they relapsed into nerfing purely based on popularity, which has been the stupidest direction I have ever seen a company take altogether. If we look at how popular the fire shotgun was, if 30% of the bug player base was using it at one point, how was it a problem that 70% of the player base wasn't using it? I could see it being a problem if 70% of the people were using it, but 30% is really not that bad. And basically every weapon nerf in this game has just been to make things feel worse to use and give it less magazines to just force a supply backpack meta even more. Lorefully, by the way, the fire shotgun, just to be on that too, it's supposed to shoot slower or it melts. It's supposed to be a burst weapon. So why not slow its fire rate down and make it do what it's supposed to do? And I don't understand how the question isn't asked why people aren't using some weapons. Why are some weapons so unpopular? You didn't just make a god tier weapon that is misunderstood. I mean, just after playing the first Ascended, the devs literally buff things that people weren't using because they have the ability to critically think and understand to ask why and why aren't people doing something? Why do people want to use the weapon? Why do people do a certain thing? Why should you make things feel good and fun to use? And when half of the weapons in the game feel like they're going to fall apart in your hands while you're shooting them, how not a single one gets a meaningful buff is mind-blowing to me. I have no idea why there isn't a weapon bench or an attachment system, but we need to be able to tailor our weapons to our builds like the first game. It's just a removed feature that makes Helldivers 2 worse for no reason when they got it right the first time. That way everyone could just do whatever they want, and then the weapon spread would be a lot less weighted on one thing because you could just do whatever you feel like. But the balance team keeps making these disconnected decisions that don't make sense for the game that they're working on. And that's why if they reverted every nerf and bad change they've made to the game, not the bugs that made weapons ludicrously overpowered, we would have the game we all fell in love with. And to top that off, this isn't a serious game. It's a meme game. When I load into my ship, there's Eagle Sweat ads dripping from the walls. How can you tell me to take this game serious when one of the first thing I hear is a eagle cawing in my ears telling me to spray eagle sweat all over myself? It just doesn't make any sense. And then I load into a mission and I drop $1 trillion of artillery on one scavenger. Can you explain that to me? There's no reason why my primary has to feel like a Nerf gun. It's also really unfortunate to see another game with devs that can't play on its hardest difficulty, man. Because every game that bounces from the bottom up has the same problems, man. It's crazy that this is where we end up. And before the official Discord moderator puts their fedora on, is like, bro, you could use anything if you're good enough. You're right. I can. The difference is I can also prove that I can use everything that I'm doing. And I'm really tired of all these fake posts and videos where for some reason the difficulty is always hidden. And the enemy they're fighting, even in the trailer in some cases, is bleeding out when they kill it. Saying, oh, this is the next OP, but the thing is half dead when they shoot it. It's become a norm on this game for people to talk about the hardest difficulty that they don't and can't play. People talk about this game, they don't even play it anymore. But I can't just point fingers without taking accountability. I've beaten the hardest difficulty with loadouts of pure garbage that barely functioned, just as challenges. And this was at the time long before most things had ever seen a balance pass to become relevant at all. And for the people that say it's a team game, so a solo no-death run with all the most inconsistent and worst weapons in the game at the time doesn't count. I also have a 4-man mines video on Super Helldive, which is a lot more recent, where it just shows that I can grab 3 people from my chat. We can just have all of us equip all the landmines with spears and blow Super Helldive out of the water. So I more than understand what's usable and what isn't, because I always do the thing that is the most fun. And I'll always say the same thing. Nothing in a game should ever feel bad to use or feel bad to do. And it's in nobody's best interest for the majority to be mad or upset over an update. We all play the same game, and if you can't connect with the people that want positive change, then there will be a day that comes where you'll be all alone wishing that you asked for change with everyone else, and wondering where everyone went when your favorite game dies for the 20th time. And this is a problem on a lot of games where people only care about themselves. We really saw that during the whole PSN account linking thing where they removed the game from half of the world A lot of the like super shills for this game only cared about linking their PSN account. They didn't even imagine they could have their game taken away from them. And all the reviews switch right back to positive, even though half the people in the world still can't play the game. They have their games removed from them. What happens when they finally ruin or take away the thing that you like? That's when the Glazers finally realize they should have stood up for change with everyone else when they had the chance, but nobody's left there to stand with them, and the game ends up dying. That's happened a million times. And since this game launched, after the experience I've had with the last 5 dead games I played, I wanted my community's voice to be heard so they at least felt like somebody was listening, even if it was just me, so that we could even pretend we were having a positive impact on the game. So for every update and every big patch, I do a balanced feedback forum stream where we just go over all the fun, cool, and interesting things we want to see in the game. Not trying to do anything crazy. I just want to see cool things. I want to see the bottom end brought up. It's been a consistent thing that I've done on stream every patch. The first one I wrote up by myself in March, and about 700 people tore it apart live and helped build it into what it happens to be today. The entire focus of my balanced feedback talk always prioritizes what would be fun, cool, and interesting, while trying to highlight those serious bugs and problems with the game, hoping that they get fixed. And the last one we did even got retweeted by the current CEO, and he said he was sending it to the team. Now, I never expected anything like that to even make it into the game, but a lot of the positives, even from the very first doc that we made, have made it in over time and have drastically improved the quality of life and have just made a bunch of weapons feel good and fun to use, which gave me a lot of hope that eventually all the good changes would stop having bad changes alongside them because they were unneeded. Everything I've done and tested has always been on the hardest difficulty in real scenarios to make things accessible, so I can just run meme builds with my community and just do the coolest, most fun thing that you can think of. The point of the feedback I wanted to provide was not about some sweaty meta balance, it was about everything being fun, and for the hardest difficulty to be challenging. And the craziest thing about this entire thing to me is that Super Helldive is the suggestion that I put in there. Nobody else had any feedback on it. I just named it Super Helldive and said, this is what I want in the game the most. Tier 10 is named after my suggestion, and I've impacted this game in a way I never thought I could. So hopefully you can see why I'm so frustrated. And one of the biggest problems for me is Super Helldive isn't very super. The difficulty slider has gone from getting overwhelmed by hordes and battling through swaths of enemies and feeling a power fantasy to a bunch of garbage, boring one-shots with cheesy, broken, desynced interactions that from the last dev stream I can very clearly see are just completely untested outside of a tier 5 or vertical slice environment. And anyone who says different is honestly just being completely disingenuous at this point. I know some people will say it's hard for them, but you never really push the hardest difficulty to its limits. And by that, I mean my hell dives never looked like your hell dives. The prime example is that when I was kill farming for 5,000 kills, our top out was 4,600 on stream, but on average when we were kill farming, we would hit 3,500. Now Super Helldive is supposed to be a step up from that.
Difficulty 10 has more enemies than we've had before on lower difficulties. We've really ramped it up. It's meant to feel like a real progression from 9 to 10.
We're also introducing a larger type of outpost, and it's going to be a real challenge to take on these massive fortresses.
But now we're averaging 1,500 kills per game, with 2,200 being the top out. So on average, we are killing less than half of the enemies per farm game, even on a perfect seed. And I understand that Super Helldive will probably never be hard for me, but I can try to tell you what challenges me to make critical decisions, which forces mistakes that I die to. Because when I was learning how to manipulate enemy interactions, I put heavy armor on for 2 months to learn the game, to slow my move speed so that I would be forced to stand and fight every single encounter so that I could get a better feel for how the enemies move and attack. And whenever I do a solo, no death, I have to prioritize movement. Spacing and removal of priority targets that grind my HP down are always like something on my mind. So against bugs, when we had the hunter spam patrols, the prio kill order for me was stalkers, hunters, chargers, and bile titans. This kept me from trading too much HP alongside controlling the flow of the game. And the key point of that is that big armor isn't what makes the game hard, and it shouldn't be. It should be what forces you to make a decision. And the thing I died the most to was multiple spawns of hunters coming from different angles while I was forced to make a snap decision. This only really happened on the bug patrol update, and outside of that, it was just getting ragdolled by a random stalker or charger that was just silent, or it was instantly dying to like the mega cactus plants that just kill everything in a radius. But I also take a lot of feedback and go hunting for it actively, and know that the vast majority of people were getting smoked by the hunter patrols. Things like when to throw the stratagem at the right time when armor spawns was also a big one, and it made sense because I know the majority of people are terrible at making snap decisions. Most of my mistakes come from making snap decisions. When you have to do too much at once, you get overwhelmed. And in this game, that causes a death spiral. So the immediate solution to make the game more fun and difficult is more chaff and specialized enemies that aren't heavy armor, or at least the same amount of enemies that were on the Bug Patrols update for the hardest difficulty. And for the bots, more soldier patrols and the chainsaw berserkers would be a big deal. The chainsaw berserkers push you out of your cover. They actively force you to make decisions, but I haven't really had that experience once this update. It's just devastators and rocket sentinels one-shotting you from across the map. So our power fantasy isn't there like it used to be. And that's what makes horde shooters fun. Blowing out wave after wave of enemies and then making a mistake and dying. You feel cool and epic, and the way you fail just doesn't make you feel bad. And currently, the only games I've failed are PvP matches with mines. With that being said, though, I know that the bug patrols negatively affected the casual player base, so it definitely should have been a part of anything but the hardest difficulty. And that's what Super Helldive is supposed to be. It was pitched as a sweat fiesta for the best players. And now all I die to is losing control of my character for an undetermined amount of time. Ragdoll is not an engaging way to die, and it feels cheesy when you get spammed by it. And anybody who's ever enjoyed any video game before could have told you that. But even outside of other games, we've been complaining about this on the bots since the first day. But somehow adding more of it to both factions was the best direction for this new update. And as it stands right now, with all the hidden changes and new tentacle monster, it has fully turned into just a cheesy one-shot fiesta. But we'll break down the new and old enemies, starting with the new Super Brood Commander, because this is the only enemy that this update is good. It's the only proper enemy that was added. It just spawns red warriors that are faster and do more damage, and this is great. Sometimes they even run away from you to go do whatever. I don't even know what they do, but it's interesting. They dynamically change the game in a good way. But Bile Titans have been bugged since the first major update to the game, where they removed the ability to kill it with 3 impact grenades. This completely broke the mesh to the point of it not taking damage to its face for literal months at this point. How enemies stay bugged for so long is clear evidence that they just don't test anything properly. And when we start talking about the new tentacle monster, this has to be one of the coolest, most poorly designed enemies I've ever fought in a game. By the way, I think it has tons of potential because it is fairly easy to kill. But the real problems start to arise when we just talk about the tentacles themselves. They're way too tanky for what they are, and they can just flat out one-shot you with no animation, no ground shake, and you just get sent back to your spaceship. And I'm assuming this is a bug, but it hasn't been acknowledged yet. Now, the initial deploy time of these is pretty fair when it slams its mouth into the ground. But after that, the tentacles go down and are back up, ready to attack in 4 seconds. This is way too punishing, and the devs like to talk about realistic things, but I'm pretty sure if we asked any tentacle experts, they would agree that it's unrealistic that these tentacles can do that. They also create an area denial, which forces you to make decisions. That's the good part about them. The bad part is that it makes them so hard to deal with when they're constantly spam redeploying it, and after testing it, it seems like they're supposed to despawn at about 65 meters if you break LOS, but it can bug out and basically infinitely chase you across the map in some weird scenarios that I'm still trying to figure out. But this redeploy time is the main problem and makes the enemy just feel cheesy and anti-fun. So I personally think that once a tentacle is up, it shouldn't be able to go down for at least 10 seconds unless it's shot out. They're also extremely spammy, so if you get ragdolled once, there's a high chance you're just getting CC'd to death. And anytime you completely lose control of your character in any game, it always feels like a garbage mechanic. Now, when there's one tentacle attacking you, to clarify, because I know that there's going to be somebody that's going to talk about this, the key word here is one. You can walk in like a very slow Star Wars straight to the side and reliably dodge it, or go right up to it and dodge it, but with the micro stutters and desync this update, it's very easy to get ragdoll spammed. And if you play on anything above 100 ping, connecting to a friend just exacerbates this issue. So while it's not something super difficult to evade in a controlled environment on lower difficulties with no enemies around you, in real situations, you just lose control of your character the vast majority of the time, and it just feels cheesy to die that way. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop being cheesy at the tentacle monster, because when we talk about chargers, all they do is cheesy now. They basically can snap, turn, and they said they wanted to rework these, but they only need to be reverted to patch 1 where they were fine. They've been annoying to deal with for a really long time, mainly since patch 2 when Arrowhead broke their audio cue, and for a raging beast mindlessly running at you to make no sound, it also isn't very realistic and doesn't make any sense, especially when they can just one-shot you with the new bowling feature that was added this update. A lot of the times that desync under them just kills you, and it's supposed to knock you back. It's supposed to send you flying, right? There's just so many inconsistencies with them, and sometimes their leg armor doesn't get ripped off when you're shooting one rocket in some situations. I'm not sure what causes this, but I know about the thing for moving forward for 1 damage, and even that doesn't work sometimes anymore. And as for the new sport chargers, I think they're okay, but they need to fix the general issues of normal chargers, with no audio keys and just a trashy one-shot mechanics. And the bots also have the weirdest updates every patch. Their accuracy changes all the time. Their threat radials go crazy. Like, there's been multiple updates where they just flare across the map, or they just, like, you get in combat with one patrol and you're just getting shot at from everything, and the only way to reset it is to die. Like, the balance on the bots just makes no sense. But despite that, I still think the bots have a better base design, even with the crazy ragdoll spam, which shouldn't exist in the first place, because they have those really obvious weak points. Their main issue, ironically, comes from the bugs that happen to them, like shooting through walls. And with new untested enemies, things got a lot worse. Rocket Striders can just straight up shoot through walls and one-shot you with their rocket, even though it doesn't hit you the vast majority of the time. But something that has been a problem for ages is rockets curving in the air and just hitting you in situations where they should have flown past you. And this is just another spam one-shot enemy that feels terrible to play against, that really didn't need rockets to feel interesting. And considering the main pressure point with the bots has been ragdoll spam, adding enemies with more rockets would seem silly. So they added a brand new missile tank with all the rockets. This thing is completely ridiculous. It starts popping shots off before it even hits the ground most of the time. It's overly armored. It can shoot through itself, and it just does not have a visible weak point like every other automaton for some reason. And these rockets that rain down on you from the sky are just another ragdoll fiesta spam if they aren't just insta-killing you. I think these are way too tanky for what they are, because they regularly eat Eagle airstrikes. So I personally would like to see the front and rear of the missile rack have their armor just reduced to like maybe not even a reasonable value, just drastically reduced for more counterplay. You should be able to throw grenades at the front of the missile rack and just detonate all the missiles. Like, you can throw grenades at the other tanks and blow them up, but you can't do it to this one for some reason. There needs to be more counterplay with stuff like this, especially when it's so oppressive. But the most disappointing thing about the rocket tank, out of everything, is that its cook-off is boring when it dies. This thing has a giant rack of missiles on top of it, and it has the same boring explosion as the other tanks. I should see a massive fireworks display. Just a complete disaster every time one of these things dies. Like, it should nuke everything around them. That should be one of its mechanics. And obviously, that's not as big of a deal as some of the other stuff I've talked about, but it's that immersion that made so many people enjoy this game in the first place. It's what made me fall in love with this game. It's like the cool factor of me going in and owning, but it's just not there. And like, now the most immersive enemy for me is the AT-AT, and for some reason it just blasts its cannon twice every time now. So that's clearly a bug that needs to be fixed that they still haven't addressed, man. And like I don't understand how any of this gets through testing. It can't be tested. It's just impossible. And when we look at the grand scheme of the entire game, we're not that far away from like the ideal helldive experience for everybody. Patch 1, all the enemies worked great. That's what everybody fell in love with. So if they reverted all of the enemies' base values to that, everything would be great. The threat radials and call-ins were perfect. So all the enemies need to be reverted to that state. You can add the new ones on top of that too, but they need to have the same theoretical values. And all the weapons just need the buffs that they've implemented, and all the nerfs just need to be reverted. Like, they don't make sense. I've seen a lot of people fight back and forth. I've showed you that the nerfs don't make sense. I might even do a second video just deep diving all of them. It's going to be 2 hours long, but it is what it is. But I also think, just to continue on and keep on track, there needs to be a resistance level to ragdoll on heavier armor. Like, if you're wearing 150 armor, you should not get ragdolled as much as somebody wearing light armor. It just doesn't make sense. You should have, like, some kind of bar that needs to break before you get ragdolled. And if they had that like bugged patrol increase solely for tier 10, that would literally be my perfect version of Helldivers 2. We're so close to that. But I understand that's not everyone's perfect vision for the game. It's just what I think is best. And after farming feedback for 6 months, I know the majority of people feel the exact same way, that care about the long-term health of the game. Not the shells that are just happy with everything that they do. It's for the long-term health of the game that a lot of people won't be able to see unless they invest thousands of hours in their time into it. But with the relaunch of this update having such disconnected decisions at its core, that version of Helldivers 2 for me feels further away than ever. And every time they try to remove a meta, they've just created a more toxic one, relying on the same things because nothing from the bottom ever gets buffed. The core philosophy that makes games fun is not an ideal that the people balancing the game have, and they don't have the ability to test things in live scenarios on the hardest difficulty like they say they were. I do mean that 2 build special a lot from Alexis, but the reality is whatever testing is being done is a complete waste of everybody's time. And I think the only thing a test server is going to do is make more people quit, because we'll give feedback that will get half ignored and things will end up feeling mid anyways. And the whole reason this game was successful in the first place was getting together with your friends and enjoying the night, just doing the coolest thing you could imagine. So balancing this game is the easiest job in the entire world. All you have to do is think of the coolest thing possible and do it. There's been one update in 6 months that goes with what we were promoted and sold. I just want what I was sold. I never wanted to change the original direction of the game, and I go hunting for information. Nobody wants to change the original direction of the game. We just want what we were promoted at the very beginning. So I know there's going to be some people that project that I want to just derail the entire game or whatever, but it's very clear that's not what I want to do, and I can prove that. I just want what I was promoted and promised. And most importantly, I just want the memes that I fell in love with. But the more time that passes, the more I feel like Arrowhead doesn't have the ability to consistently drive the game in a positive direction. And all that combined is why I think Helldivers 2 will never be able to reach its true potential.